The prison of the stars. The endless void of space had always been both beautiful and terrifying, a place where civilizations clashed and worlds fell into ruin. Alex Griffin, a seasoned soldier in the United Earth Forces, had seen more than his fair share of the galaxy's darker side, but nothing could have prepared him for the moment he was captured by the Zalfar Empire, an alien race that had been waging war on humanity for years. On a routine reconnaissance mission, Alex's ship was ambushed, and after a violent battle, he was taken prisoner. The Zalfar, with their advanced technology and cruel tactics, had no qualms about using humans as pawns in their galaxy-spanning war. Alex was dragged aboard the Vexillon, a warship so massive that it seemed to swallow entire moons, its hull constructed from dark alloys that gleamed like the surface of a predator's eyes. Alex's hands were bound in energy cuffs that crackled with every movement. He was thrown into the prison's cold metallic halls, his body aching from the battle and the harsh treatment. As the guards dragged him through the ship's labyrinthine corridors, Alex's mind raced. He wasn't sure where they were taking him, but he knew it wasn't a place he wanted to stay. The walls were alive with the sounds of distant screams and the clanging of chains, the air thick with the stench of ozone and something more alien, something ancient. The Zalfar guards, tall, insect-like creatures with gleaming black exoskeletons and 6 spindly legs, seemed to relish the power they held over their human prisoners. Their multifaceted eyes glinted with malice as they shoved Alex through the door of a prison cell, the heavy metal door slamming shut behind him, with a sound that reverberated through the entire ship. Alex's heart pounded as he took in his surroundings. Dim lighting, slick walls, and an overwhelming sense of danger. But this wasn't just any cell. It was a holding pen for the Zalfar's deadliest weapon, something that had been bred for destruction and annihilation. It was a dragon. Alex's mind, always sharp and calculating, went to work as he assessed his situation. The Zalfar thought they had trapped him, that they could break him. They were wrong. He wasn't just any prisoner. He was a soldier, trained to survive under the harshest conditions. And this dragon, this beast, they had no idea what they were about to unleash. The low, guttural growl that echoed through the chamber caused Alex's pulse to quicken. Slowly, he turned his head toward the source of the sound. The creature emerged from the shadows, its glowing amber eyes locking onto him. It was enormous. Its scales shimmered like molten lava, its wings folded against its back like the wings of an ancient beast ready to take flight. Its claws scraped against the metal floor, sending sparks flying in every direction. The air seemed to shimmer with the heat it exhaled. "Melith," Alex whispered, recognizing the creature from his training. The Zalfar had bred the Meloths to be their ultimate weapon. Twin dragons capable of tearing apart entire armies with nothing but their claws and fire. But what the Zalfar didn't know was that Alex wasn't easily intimidated. "You're bigger than I thought," Alex muttered to himself, his mind already working out a plan. This beast might be terrifying, but it was still just an animal that could be outsmarted. Melith let out a low, ferocious growl, its massive jaws opening to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth. The creature's massive tail lashed the air, causing the ground to shake beneath Alex's feet. The dragon was ready to strike. Alex's heart rate steadied as his military instincts took over. He was a man who had faced death countless times before. This was just another challenge. "Let's see how you handle me," he muttered under his breath. The battle for survival had just begun. Clash of wills. Alex barely had time to brace himself before the dragon lunged. Melith's speed was breathtaking, its massive claws slicing through the air with lethal precision. Alex's heart raced, but his body moved before his mind could catch up. The dragon's talons swept across the space where he had been just moments ago, missing him by mere inches. Without missing a beat, Alex dropped low, rolling across the cold metal floor, his muscles screaming in protest from the impact. He sprang to his feet in one smooth motion, eyes scanning the dragon as it turned, its glowing amber eyes fixed on him. The beast was fast, but Alex was faster. He knew that to survive in this cell, he couldn't just rely on his strength or speed alone. He needed to be smarter than the dragon. Melith had the size, the power, and the ferocity of a predator born to destroy. But Alex had something more: experience and ingenuity. As the dragon roared, its tail crashing against the floor in a violent arc, Alex dove to the side, narrowly escaping the blow that would have surely broken every bone in his body. Alex could feel the heat radiating from the dragon's body, the air growing thicker with every breath it took. The smell of sulfur and burning metal filled his nostrils as the creature readied itself for another strike. But Alex was ready. He didn't just want to survive this fight. He wanted to outsmart the beast. "Come on then," Alex said, his voice calm but laced with defiance. "Show me what you've got." Melith's response was a deep, guttural growl, a sound so primal it made the hairs on the back of Alex's neck stand up. The dragon's wings unfurled with a deafening flap, creating a gust of wind that slammed into Alex's chest, nearly knocking the air from his lungs. But he didn't falter. Instead, he seized the opportunity, darting forward as the dragon reared back for another attack. Melith's jaws snapped shut with a thunderous crack, and Alex knew he couldn't keep dodging forever. The dragon was relentless, its attacks becoming faster and more precise with each passing moment. Alex's mind raced as he looked for an opening, a weak spot, something to turn the tide. As the dragon lunged again, Alex did something unexpected. He didn't dodge this time. Instead, he surged forward, his body coiled like a spring. The moment Melith's claws came within reach, Alex dove beneath the creature's massive form, using its own momentum to his advantage. He landed a hard punch against the dragon's side, his fist connecting with the molten scales that covered its body. The blow was strong enough to make the dragon stagger, but the scales were tougher than steel, and the pain shot up Alex's arm like an electric jolt. "Not bad, but I faced worse," Alex muttered, shaking out his hand, willing the pain away. Melith let out a roar of fury, and for the first time, Alex saw something new in its eyes: confusion. The dragon had been bred to hunt, to fight, to destroy, but it hadn't encountered an opponent like Alex before. He wasn't just trying to survive. He was forcing the creature to think, to adapt. The battle had shifted, not in strength or size, but in will. Alex could see the frustration in the dragon's glowing eyes. It was used to being the apex predator, but now it was being tested in ways it had never been before. The Zolfar might have bred the Melith for destruction, but they had failed to account for the one thing that could outsmart even the deadliest of beasts: human ingenuity. With a sudden twist of its tail, Melith slammed Alex into the wall of the cell. The force of the impact knocked the breath from his lungs, and for a moment, his vision blurred. But through the pain, one thing became clear to him. The dragon was playing a dangerous game, one that Alex was determined to win. "You think you're the only one who's been caged," Alex grunted as he pushed himself up, wiping blood from his split lip. "I've survived worse than you, and I'll survive this too." The dragon let out a sharp growl, its tail lashing as it closed the distance between them. Alex, bloodied but not broken, squared his shoulders. He wasn't just fighting for his life anymore. He was fighting for something more, something the Zolfar hadn't anticipated: for freedom. The tension in the cell grew thick as Alex and Melith locked eyes once again. It was no longer just a battle of survival. It was a battle of wills. And only one of them would walk away from this encounter: the unlikely alliance. The air in the cell was thick with tension. The battle had been fierce, but neither Alex nor Melith had emerged victorious. Yet, the dragon's amber eyes flickered with a strange emotion as it stared down at the human, bloody but standing tall in the center of the cage. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the sound of the prison's hum and the occasional scrape of the dragon's claws against the metal floor. Alex's chest heaved with every breath, his muscles burning from the earlier fight. He had pushed himself to the edge, and now every fiber of his being screamed for rest. But he couldn't afford to relax. Not yet. The dragon might have backed off for a moment, but it was only a pause, not an end. He could sense the intelligence in its gaze. Melith wasn't just a mindless beast. It was a creature bred for war. Yes, but not without purpose. It was calculating. "You think you've won, don't you?" Alex said, his voice hoarse but defiant. "But you're wrong. You're still trapped in here with me." The dragon growled low in its throat, a deep sound that resonated through the walls of the cell. But there was something different about the growl this time. It wasn't the same fury that had fueled its previous attacks. This time, there was hesitation, like Melith was considering something it had never considered before. Alex watched carefully, his every sense alert. Despite the pain still throbbing in his body, despite the heat of the dragon's breath, and the sense of impending doom that hovered in the air, something was changing. This fight wasn't over, it was evolving. The dragon's glowing eyes shifted, narrowing ever so slightly. Its massive head tilted to one side, its tail twitching with what Alex could only describe as curiosity. It was a sharp contrast to the vicious predator that had attacked him moments before. This creature, this Melith, wasn't just following its instincts anymore. It was thinking. And Alex had a feeling that the creature wasn't sure how to deal with a human who wasn't afraid. "Listen," Alex said, his voice steady despite the blood dripping from his lip. "I don't want to fight you. I never did. But they want us to kill each other, to entertain them, to give them their blood sport. I don't think you want that any more than I do." The words hung in the air, quiet but heavy. For the first time since their encounter, the dragon didn't move. It remained still, its piercing amber eyes fixed on Alex. A pulse of heat radiated from its body. But there was no attack, no lunging, no roaring, just the sound of its steady breathing. "Maybe you're not the monster here," Alex continued, taking the slow step forward. "Maybe we're both just pawns in their game." The dragon's head shifted slightly, and Alex took it as a sign to keep going. "Look, I know what you are. You're a weapon. You've been bred to fight, to kill. But that doesn't mean you want to. That doesn't mean you're some mindless beast. I've fought against enough monsters to know the difference." Melith's eyes flickered, and for a moment, Alex thought he saw something shift in its gaze, something like understanding. Alex stood still, his heart racing, but he kept his hands open and unthreatening. A gesture of peace. "We don't have to fight each other. We're both prisoners here, but we don't have to be their entertainment. We can get out of this together." The dragon's massive form didn't move, but the tension in the air seemed to dissipate just slightly. Melith's low growl softened, its tail flicking once more, this time more cautiously, as if contemplating Alex's words. For the first time since their battle began, there was a moment of stillness, an unspoken understanding that hung between them, the predator and the prey. Two beings who had been forced into a conflict neither of them wanted, both trapped by the same cruel captors. Alex knew that this wasn't going to be easy. He wasn't about to trust the dragon completely, but he could sense that something had shifted. This was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a chance, however small, that he might find an ally in the most unlikely of places. The hum of the prison's power grid seemed to grow louder as the moments stretched on. The lights flickered, casting long shadows across the cell, but neither Alex nor Melith moved. The beast was still, its molten scales shimmering in the dim light, its eyes never leaving Alex's face. "I can get us out of here," Alex said quietly, his voice steady and confident. "But I need you to trust me. You can keep fighting, keep trying to tear me apart, but that's not going to help either of us. You're smart. You know that." Melith's eyes seemed to flicker once more, its gaze sharpening. Alex held his breath. He wasn't sure if the dragon would attack again, or if it had truly understood what he was offering. But he had no other choice now. He was all in. Then, after what felt like an eternity, Melith's growl softened again, and the dragon took a cautious step back, its wings folding against its body. It wasn't surrendering. Not yet. But it wasn't attacking either. "All right," Alex said, his voice low but filled with quiet resolve. "Let's figure this out together." In that moment, something changed between them. Not trust, not friendship, but a fragile alliance, born from necessity, forged in the heat of battle. Two creatures from different worlds, bound by the same enemy, standing together in a cage meant to break them both. And for the first time, Alex felt that maybe, just maybe, he had a fighting chance. The escape plan. The silence that hung in the air was no longer oppressive, but charged with the kind of tension that preceded something monumental. Alex and Melith stood facing each other, neither quite sure of what had just transpired between them. The dragon's massive form remained crouched in the far corner of the cell, its eyes never leaving Alex. But instead of the predatory gleam that had once dominated its gaze, there was now something new, something like curiosity, or perhaps the beginnings of respect. Alex felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. He had faced countless challenges, but none as daunting as this. His plan wasn't perfect. It wasn't even fully formed. But it was the only chance they had. And in a place like this, that was all he could ask for. "All right, Melith," Alex began, his voice low but purposeful. "We've got one shot at this. We don't have much time." The dragon growled softly, its eyes narrowed, but it didn't move. Alex wasn't sure if Melith understood him fully, but its actions so far suggested that it was at least listening. The air in the cell felt heavier, as though the very walls were pressing in on them, reminding them of the limits of their cage. Alex wiped the sweat from his brow and paced slowly, his mind working at full speed. He'd been in situations like this before, situations where the odds were stacked impossibly high. But this was different. The prison they were in was a living, breathing entity in itself, the Zalfar warship. Everything about it was designed to crush the will of its prisoners, to break them down until they were nothing more than entertainment for their captors. But Alex had one thing the Zalfar hadn't accounted for: resourcefulness. The trick was understanding the prison as much as he understood the creature he was now allied with. He had to make it out of here. And if that meant bending the rules, even for a creature like Melith, then so be it. "First thing we need to do," Alex muttered to himself, almost more for his own benefit than Melith's, "is figure out where we are and how to get through those barriers." The Zalfar had designed the cell to be a masterpiece of captivity. Energy shields, force fields, and countless layers of security were in place to ensure no one escaped. But Alex knew the weaknesses in systems like these. He had studied them before, during his training in the human resistance. Every prison, no matter how advanced, had its flaws, and finding those flaws was key to escaping. He looked up at Melith, who seemed to be watching him, its molten scales shimmering in the dim light. "We're not just getting out of here physically," Alex said slowly, as if piecing together his thoughts aloud. "The first step is breaking the system. We have to hit them where it hurts, their control over us." The dragon's eyes seemed to narrow as it slowly shifted, making an almost imperceptible movement with its massive tail. Whether it understood or not, Alex couldn't be sure, but he had no doubt that Melith was more intelligent than its appearance let on. The dragon was bred for destruction, yes, but it was also a warrior, capable of much more than simple violence. Alex's mind whirred, analyzing the prison's architecture in his head. There had to be a way to disrupt the energy shields. But how? The walls of the cell were laced with energy barriers that pulsed with an eerie red glow. The force fields held them in place, and with no obvious way to shut them down. Alex knew they'd need something more than brute force. His gaze shifted to the ceiling. If the barriers were controlled by a central system, there had to be a power source. And if there was a power source, then there had to be a way to access it. "Melith," Alex said suddenly, turning to the dragon. The creature's amber eyes fixed on him, its head tilted as though considering his words. "You've got claws. Big, sharp claws. What I need is for you to tear up the ceiling, right above that corner. There might be a weak spot in the barrier network, and I think it's right there." For a long moment, Melith didn't move. Alex's pulse quickened. The silence stretched on, unbearable, and Alex wondered if he had made a mistake, if he was pushing the dragon too hard, too fast. Then, without warning, the dragon stirred. Its enormous tail flicked once, sending a loud crash through the cell as it slammed against the wall. Alex watched, wide-eyed, as Melith's sharp claws scraped against the ceiling, sending sparks flying as the metal of the ship groaned under the pressure. The creature's eyes blazed with fury, but this time, the rage was controlled, focused. It wasn't mindless violence, it was precision. Slowly but surely, Melith tore into the ceiling, claws sinking into the cold metal and ripping it apart with surprising speed. Alex felt a strange mix of awe and fear watching the dragon work. There was a beauty in its destruction, an artistry to it that was both terrifying and mesmerizing. With a final, mighty roar, Melith ripped the last piece of the ceiling away, exposing a tangle of wires and energy conduits. The air hummed with the sound of the ship's systems, and Alex's heart pounded in his chest. He knew that if they could disrupt those conduits, they could cut off the energy to the barriers. But it was risky. If they failed, they'd be left with nothing but the wrath of an angry dragon and the full force of the Zolthar's security system bearing down on them. But there was no turning back now. Alex moved quickly, his eyes scanning the exposed wiring. There was a control panel just beneath it, a weak spot where the ship's energy grid fed into the cells. If he could sever the connection, they'd have a chance. He reached for his utility knife, fingers trembling as he worked. The air crackled with electricity, and he knew he was close. "Hold on," he muttered to himself. "We're almost there." Suddenly, the ship shuddered, and the power grid flickered. Alex froze. The entire ship was reacting to their disruption. The energy in the room surged as the cell's force field wavered. This was it. "Melith!" Alex shouted, barely able to hear his own voice over the roar of the ship's machinery. "We're going to make it out of here. Stay with me." The dragon let out a deafening roar, and for the first time, Alex believed that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance to escape, breaking through the walls. The ship groaned in protest as Alex's hands worked faster, his fingers moving with precision even though the sweat was dripping from his brow. The air around them crackled with the rising energy, a pulse of power that seemed to throb through the walls of the cell. Melith stood just behind him, its massive form filling the room, ready for whatever came next. The dragon's amber eyes flickered with the same tension that gripped Alex. This was the moment of truth. "Come on," Alex muttered under his breath as his knife pried at the wiring, sparks flying with each twist of the blade. "I'm not giving up now." The entire ship seemed to hold its breath, the hum of its systems suddenly deafening, as if the Zolthar warship was aware of the impending breach. The force fields in the cell flickered, their red glow dimming for the briefest of moments before flaring back up. But Alex saw it, the crack in the barrier, a vulnerable gap. This was it. Behind him, Melith rumbled, its deep voice vibrating through the air as if sensing the tension. Alex didn't need to turn to know that the dragon was ready for action. It had already proven that its loyalty wasn't to the Zolthar. This was about survival. The choice had been made, and Alex wasn't alone in this fight. "Melith," Alex said with a final glance over his shoulder, "you need to hit the wall behind me. The energy grid's unstable right now. The barrier should collapse if we can breach it." The dragon's molten scales glinted as it shifted its massive form, tail flicking with anticipation. The ground beneath Alex's feet trembled as Melith moved forward, a powerful creature driven by an instinctual need to break free. Alex stepped aside, pressing himself against the wall as Melith launched forward. With a roar that shook the walls, Melith's claws slashed at the barrier, its strength shaking the entire room. The impact was thunderous, like the strike of a hammer against steel. The barrier wavered, crackling with energy as it struggled to hold, but Melith didn't relent. The dragon's claws gouged deep into the wall, the energy grid flickering with every strike. It was like watching a force of nature at work, relentless and unstoppable. Alex's heart pounded as the gap in the force field widened. They were getting closer. He could almost taste the freedom on the other side, the promise of escape that was just within reach. But even as the barrier cracked, the alarm system of the ship triggered, a piercing screech that reverberated throughout the entire vessel. The Zolfar were awake, and they weren't going to let this escape happen without a fight. Damn it! Alex swore under his breath. He knew that the countdown had begun. They had precious moments before reinforcements arrived. The ship would flood with guards, and every corner of the warship would be on high alert. The odds of getting out alive were rapidly shrinking. But there was no turning back now. They had pushed the system to its breaking point, and Alex wasn't about to stop until they were free. Melith! Alex shouted, not turning around but knowing the dragon could hear him. One more strike. Hit the center. With another growl, Melith lunged again, its massive form barely fitting the confines of the cell. Its claws slammed into the weakened energy grid, the force of the blow causing the entire structure to shudder. There was a flash of blue light, and then silence. For a moment, everything was still. The barrier had disappeared. Alex didn't waste a second. He sprang forward, heart racing, as he dashed toward the now gaping hole in the force field. The cool air of the outside corridor rushed in, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he could taste freedom. But it was far from over. There was still so much to do. "Let's move," he shouted, his voice carrying through the now breachable space. Melith followed him with surprising grace for such a large creature, its wings folding in tightly to avoid scraping the walls. It moved like a shadow, stealthy despite its imposing size. The corridor beyond the cell was dimly lit, but the quiet hum of the ship's machinery filled the air, alerting Alex to the fact that their escape wasn't as clean as he hoped. The Zolfar would be coming soon. With every step, Alex could feel the weight of their situation pressing down on him. There were no more distractions. This was the real fight, the one that would determine if they lived or died. He had no illusions about the danger they were in, but he also knew that the Zolfar had underestimated them both. "I've been through worse," Alex muttered to himself, a bitter smile crossing his face. The familiar words were like a mantra, something to ground him in the chaos. "We just need to keep moving." Suddenly, the air shifted. A faint vibration traveled through the floor, followed by a low hum. They weren't alone. The sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor, quick and purposeful. Alex didn't hesitate. "Move, move," he barked at Melith, urging the dragon to follow him as he sprinted ahead, weaving between shadows and ducking into small alcoves. They had to be fast, silent. If they were going to survive, they had to outwit the Zolfar, not just outfight them. The sound of boots clicking against the metal floor grew louder, but Alex didn't slow down. His eyes darted around, scanning for any potential escape route. The ship was a labyrinth of dark hallways, but Alex knew it well enough to guess where they were. They were heading for the ship's docking bay, the only place where they might find an escape pod. But getting there wouldn't be easy. "I need a distraction," Alex muttered under his breath. "Something big." Without thinking, he pulled a small device from his belt, a magnetic pulse bomb, one of the few gadgets he had left. It was a risky move, but desperate times called for desperate measures. He tossed the bomb down the corridor, watching it clatter against the metal floor before sliding under a doorway. Then, without another word, he grabbed Melith's massive claw and pulled the dragon into a side passage. The pulse bomb detonated with a sharp metallic whine, followed by a thunderous blast. The corridor ahead was temporarily cut off by the shockwave. sending debris flying and creating the perfect opening. "Go!" Alex shouted, pushing forward. Miloth surged forward with terrifying speed, its claws scraping against the metal as it followed him down the narrow hall. Alex could feel his pulse thundering in his ears. This was it. They were nearly there. But the Zolfar were close behind. And the real fight was only just beginning. The chase through the abyss. The explosion had torn through the corridor like a thunderclap, its echoes rattling the very walls of the Zolfar warship. But Alex didn't have time to savor the moment. The ship was alive, buzzing with the heavy footsteps of Zolfar soldiers, their voices barking orders as they scrambled to respond to the breach. The clock was ticking, and their enemies were closing in. If they didn't act fast, this small window of opportunity would close, and their escape would become impossible. "Keep moving, Miloth," Alex urged, his breath coming in sharp gasps as he dashed down the dark passage, the sharp scrape of the dragon's claws following close behind. The ship's layout was becoming more familiar with each step, the winding hallways leading them ever closer to the docking bay. But it wasn't going to be easy. The Zolfar had already set up checkpoints in the most strategic places. Alex's heart raced. There was no turning back now. They had breached the prison, but now they had to survive the relentless pursuit that awaited them. The Zolfar were not known for mercy, and failure meant certain death. The cold metal beneath his boots vibrated with each footfall as he darted through another twisting corridor. The low hum of the ship's power grid seemed to vibrate the very air around them, the faint flicker of the red emergency lights casting an eerie glow on the walls. They were nearing the heart of the ship, and every sense in Alex's body was screaming at him to move faster. Behind them, the sound of Zolfar foot soldiers drew nearer, their insectoid bodies rushing through the labyrinthine halls. Alex had learned to count on the ship's complexities. They were an advantage now. The layout, with its maze of turns, could work in their favor if they kept their wits about them. But there was a problem. A large one. Alex turned a corner sharply, just as Miloth's heavy tail swept across the narrow space behind him, narrowly avoiding a collision with a metal beam. The dragon's scales shimmered in the dim light as it slid to a halt beside him, breathing heavily. Its glowing amber eyes darted toward the ceiling, catching the distant shadows of Zolfar soldiers rapidly closing the gap. "Damn," Alex muttered, his mind racing. They had seconds before they were overwhelmed. And just ahead, the corridor split into two. They couldn't risk being cornered. Without hesitation, Alex pulled out a small handheld device, a cloaking module. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to create a temporary shield, allowing them to slip past unnoticed for a brief window of time. He activated it, the faint hum of the device blending into the noise of the ship. For a few heart-stopping seconds, Alex and Miloth vanished from sight, their forms cloaked by the technology. But the tension didn't lessen. They could hear the soldiers' voices growing louder, the sound of armored boots pounding against the metal floor echoing like a death knell. "Follow me," Alex whispered urgently, gesturing to the side passage. They had no time to waste. Every second spent lingering could be the difference between life and death. The cloaking field shimmered, and Alex dashed through the side corridor, his heart pounding in his chest. The flickering red lights above them cast unsettling shadows along the metal walls, but the further they went, the more familiar the path became. Soon, they would reach the ship's outer rim, where the docking bay awaited. There was a chance, just a chance, that they might find an escape pod in time. But as Alex rounded another corner, his gut twisted. A Zolfar squad had blocked the main route ahead, their tall, spindly bodies moving with predatory grace. The guards' voices were low but deliberate, discussing the breach, their insectoid antennae twitching in the dim light as they scanned the surroundings for any sign of movement. Alex's pulse quickened. They had no choice. He quickly scanned the environment and spotted a maintenance shaft hidden behind a panel in the wall. It was a small space, barely large enough for him to crawl through. but it was their best option. "Melith," he hissed, pointing toward the shaft. "We need to go through there now." The dragon's eyes flickered toward the shaft, then back to the soldiers blocking the main path. Melith snarled under its breath, but Alex saw the hesitation in the creature's movements. This wasn't a battle it could win, not with so many soldiers, not with the risk of being trapped. The sounds of the Zalfar soldiers grew louder, their mandibles clicking as they closed in on the two fugitives. Alex's mind raced. The cloaking device was still active, but only for a few more moments before it would dissipate. They had to move. "Go," Alex commanded, his voice low but sharp. Melith hesitated for only a second before it lunged toward the maintenance shaft, its massive form squeezing into the tight space behind Alex. The dragon's wings folded against its back, but the confined space made every movement a struggle. It was a far cry from the free-roaming beast that had fought so fiercely in the cell, but at least they were moving, staying one step ahead. They crawled through the shaft, Alex leading the way, his heart hammering in his chest. He could feel the heat of Melith's body behind him, the dragon's breath heavy as it navigated the cramped tunnels. Time was running out. The Zalfar soldiers would be on them any second, and their cloaking module wasn't going to protect them forever. Finally, they reached the end of the shaft, and Alex pressed his ear to the wall, listening. The sound of the Zalfar soldiers was fading, but only slightly. They still had to be careful. Alex gave Melith a look of determination. The docking bay wasn't far now, just beyond the next set of hallways. "Stay quiet," Alex whispered. "We're almost there." They emerged from the maintenance shaft, crouching low as they moved through the darkened hall. Each step was calculated, every noise amplified by the silence of the ship around them. They were getting closer, but so were the Zalfar. Suddenly, a sharp sound sliced through the quiet. The unmistakable hum of Zalfar gunfire, followed by the roar of Melith's wings as the dragon charged forward. It was too late to hide. The chase had just begun.